think there are two big categories of boundaries, and one is the ones that we socially negotiate. And I would include all of the legal boundaries in that, because we have a lot of unpacking to do about the boundaries that exist that we've negotiated socially. For example, we're working with a community now in the Bay Area, San Francisco Bay Area, that has been living in one small area because there were housing covenants that prevented them from living. This is an African American community, and they weren't allowed to move to other places. So now they live in just one little section of Marin County called Marin City.
Oh,
It's a small group of people that are left, and they are facing displacement problems, but they have no place else to go now that the Bay Area is so expensive. So they're losing their territory, essentially, and they're losing it. We could say it's an economic reason because of house prices having gone up, but really it's a territorial reason where social agreements in the 1950s and 60s and 70s prevented people from being able to live wherever they wanted if they were dark-skinned. So because of the racialization of being able to buy a house, where if you were Black, you couldn't buy a house in Marin County, people are stuck in this little territory. So we're trying to help everybody understand that. And that's a common condition in a lot of places where property values have gone up, that we have to reconsider the injustices of the way people got territory in the past and how skin color played a role in deciding who was able to buy land and who wasn't. So that's one example. The other example of the legal category, social and legal agreements, is related to Indigenous peoples. And we're going to be having a lot of conversations and planning about how to return land to Indigenous management and ownership. And we're having that conversation in the Bay Area because a group of Ohlone people have finally received the first gift of land back. I mean, gift is a funny word. You know, we took it from them,
right.
And we owe it to them. It's theirs. They never agreed to give it up. So we've seen the first reclamation of land, or what the Ohlone call rematriation of land, since the Spanish colonial era. It's a small area of land owned by a land trust called Segura Te, and they're an Ohlone tribal group. And I hope we'll be having lots of conversations about that. The University of California actually has the largest collection of indigenous human remains in the United States.
Oh.
It's a huge collection that was stolen from burial mounds along the Bay Edge and needs to be repatriated, needs to be given back to the tribe, or rematriated, as the Ohlone say. So we're trying to figure out how that could happen. The Ohlone need the land to do the reburial, the reinterment of their ancestors' remains.
Okay.
So this whole question of legal territories that seemed kind of settled has now come back up as a really big and important issue of boundaries in urban space, whether it's because of racism against African Americans, or whether it's because of racism and genocide against Native Americans. And even though the legal property ownership thing is settled, it's not settled politically. Right. So socially and ethically and politically, we're going to have to rediscuss who has what territory in cities like San Francisco or Oakland. They were basically invaded, right, and taken over and deposed. So there's a lot of injustice that we have to pay attention to related to territories and boundaries. That's the area that I work on most directly, where we're trying to redefine the boundaries of spaces we look at along the coast.
Okay.
And there's a concept being used that I've helped to develop called Operational Landscape Units, OLU. And that's a terrible name. It comes from the scientific literature, but we talk about that here as nature's jurisdictions.
Uh-huh.
So you have your counties, you have your cities, you have your state, you have lots of different jurisdictions These are nature's jurisdictions. And it goes beyond the watershed into the water of the ocean and talking about how do larval organisms circulate? How does sand move? How do the things that we do on the land connect to the way things are moving in the water? And this is really important for adaptation to rising sea levels and rising groundwater. And we include things like pipe systems that are artificial, as well as natural things like the depth at which waves begin to disturb the bottom of the sand. So we're looking ecologically at flows. How do flows define patches on the land and in the water, and especially where the land meets the water? So that's our big challenge, is to figure out how to understand those and then how to design and plan using those ecological flows as the basis for how we think about design. It's an interesting question, because I'd like to say that cultural appreciation is, really widespread and well understood, but I think we're renegotiating what is cultural appropriation and what is cultural appreciation. That's a really big topic now that, we're trying to be respectful, and people who have historically been oppressed and mistreated need to be able to say what they think is cultural appropriation and what's appreciation. And the rest of us in the sort of majority culture, and we need to listen.